a few minutes after 11, and I think everyone's here that's going to be here. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll note before you on your desk, there's an agenda. Right now, we are calling the meeting to order. And for introductions, did you just want to introduce speakers or?
So wasn't here last week, who couldn't attend the kickoff meeting. And then introduction of staff, just to recap. Is there anyone here who wasn't here last week? Oh, Councilman Bolden, hi.
Hi.
Also, Larry King, Steele Wright, and Mabel and Jason Toya couldn't attend. I think Field also was unavailable. The meeting will be recorded, so they'll be able to view it later on, and we'll update them today that we have today. But I think that's it.
Okay, great. So without any delay, we'll go ahead and get right into the presentation. This is first presentation discussion regarding principles of long range. That's going to be Larissa.
I'm gonna try to make that more interesting than it sounds. It sounds like you guys signed up for that. But what we wanted to do this, and I'm not gonna take very long here. It is 11:11. I'm gonna try to run through to give you guys a goal of what we expect to see here at the end of this. And also, I think the most important thing is we all leave this knowing what this comprehensive plan process is going to do and what it's not going to do. And yeah, that's a pretty picture of downtown that Jason Reyna took, I believe. So why do we plan? You can see that phrase up there, to realize the common values vital to our individual and community well. Well, let's break that down a little bit. Common. Mario talked at our last meeting about reaching consensus. We want to make sure that it's something that we reach these goals and ideals that the community generally agrees with, right? That's pretty fair place to start, I think. Values, so that we are protecting, enhancing, and growing the way we live, work, and enjoy the city. That's what I mean by values up there. Individual and community well-being. What is best for Brad may not be best for Ed, but hopefully we can find something that works well enough for the both of them. And then realize, and we mean the two definitions of realize here. We mean as in, I realized this about Nacogdoches. I observed this about Nacogdoches. And then also, I want to see this about Nacogdoches, kind of manifesting these things about Nacogdoches. This is just something I put up in every single presentation I ever give about. A lot of you have probably seen this, so I apologize. But just to show you that we all share common values. From about the 1950s to 2020, when you survey a community and say, what are your top values in the community that you want to live in? They say these same things over and over and over again. So at moments when we feel like we can't agree on things, think about this list. That your neighbor that you are just diametrically opposed, how dare you not think that, you know, I was going to come up with an example, but I don't want to upset anybody. That something is the most important thing when I think something else is the most important thing. Several 100 million Americans agree on these over and over and over again. One thing that you may not see on that list is historic preservation. I never want to leave that off the list, but I think in our case, uniqueness. We could put historic preservation / uniqueness there. So again, urban planning is something that we do all over the world, all over the country. We've done it since time began. We originally did it so that kings and queens and the royalty could plan out their cities in a nice way. It happened organically at first. We would put, export and import activities on transportation routes and build along rivers and things like that. We would separate land uses. I'm not going to go deep into all of those things, but just know that this is something we've always done. Cities all over the world have done it and continue to do it. One of the most beautiful examples is Washington, D.C. Another beautiful example, downtown Nacogdoches. So we've been doing this in our town for a very long time. We will continue to do it, hopefully as well as we did and this original plan when we originally laid out the square. So the planning process, you could be planning a meal, you could be planning a business, or you could be going through a city comprehensive planning process. The steps are all the same. First, you assess, you figure out where we are, where we've been, what's going on right now. In the next several months, that's what you will be doing, hopefully. If the city council moves forward with this project, hopefully you will be doing that. And looking at current demographic, looking at current development patterns, looking at what happened over the demographics over the last 20 years, things like that. Then the fun part, where we get to start making decisions about the future. So we use that information that we learned in the assessment, and we start to develop those goals and visions. At the end of this process, when we have a beautiful comprehensive plan, we don't just put it on a shelf. We formulate rules or adjust our rules. So in this case, it would be our zoning ordinances, our land development codes, subdivision ordinances, things like that, so that we can enact the visions and we can realize those visions and goals from the comp plan. And then we send our city staff and our code enforcement and our building officials and our planners out, and we employ those regulations. Something to keep in mind throughout the planning process is balance. I touched on that a little bit on that first slide, talking about the common values, but it's important, keep this slide in your head too, that if we lean any one direction on any one of these, let's say that I'm an economic developer, so economic benefits are number one. Well, if we lean too heavily on economics and we are too concerned with growing and building, then we lose a little bit on the social and the environmental side. And social means quality of life, things, public schools, housing, things like that. If we move too far towards the environmental side, makes it a little bit harder to build those houses we want to live in, makes it a little bit harder to build those businesses that we want to work in. So just balance is extremely important in comprehensive planning. So the comprehensive plan is vital to the city because, like we said, we assess, we develop the plan, and then we work on the regulations that plan talks to. So these are all of the, or not all, these are the major plans the major regulations, that our comprehensive plan currently talks to and will inform in the future. So things like development codes, that's going to be our zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, other ordinances that we may not even have on the books yet. Our environmental protection, historic preservation, again, we know that that's extremely important to academics. Economic development. So a very simple example, let's say that at the end of this planning process, the community decided we want to be a rural, sleepy town, 35,000 people, not another soul do we want to move here. That greatly influences how we do economic development in this town. So, and the opposite would be true too. If we want to grow gangbusters and reach 100,000 people in the next 20 years, that would also greatly affect how we do economic development. And then our capital improvement plans. I think you've heard a lot about this in the last couple of months. If you've been paying the city council, paying attention to city council, we've got a lot of capital improvements that need to be made. It is important to consider our future growth and development when we're doing this capital improvement. We want to build the sewer line of the adequate size and in the right place one time. We don't want to mess up and focus our attention on the wrong part of town, or build that sewer line too small, or build it too big. So just a little bit about what comprehensive planning is and is not. It's not static. It can be updated over time as things change. It is not the same thing as the zoning ordinance. It informs the zoning ordinance. It's very close to the zoning ordinance, but we won't talk about what James Montoya's lot that he owns on South Street is zoned. I don't know that he owns a lot on South Street. I was just giving an example, but we won't get down in those weeds of specific zoning rules. We may talk about, here's something that the zoning ordinance we should look into adding to the zoning ordinance to achieve this thing, but we won't talk about those specific regulations. It's not a replacement for market forces. We could say we want to double the size of this community in 30 years. There's still some market forces behind that are going to control that, unfortunately. It's not a force for immediate change. We're going to have a lot of momentum and get excited when we get done with this. And then we need to remember that this is a plan over 20 years. It takes a long time to implement change. We are planting seeds for the forests that our children will play in, hopefully at some point in the future. It's not a silver bullet. I will never forget on one of a planning exercise I participated in, and I was asking what they hoped to get out of it. And this was literally a neighborhood plan. And somebody said, I hope that we can fix generational poverty. And I was like, not in a neighborhood plan, guys. So this is not going to fix everything in our community, but it is going to give us steps to get there. It's not always gigantic changes. It could be really small incremental changes that just make our community a better place to be. It is an identification of needs. So it is looking at what do we need to do to get where we want to be. It's a process to determine goals and priorities, like I said. It's an identification of who we are and what we want to be. If I asked all of you in this room, who is Nacogdoches? What do you want Nacogdoches to be in the future? I would probably get 20 different answers. I'm not saying we have to come out with one answer, but we have to get to probably 2 or 3 answers there that are pretty similar. And again, it's about balancing act. If you remember that Venn diagram of balancing our amazing history, our future, our very bright potential future, our built environment, our natural environment, and the people that live here, and making sure that it is a place that people continue to want to live and hopefully continue to move here and help us do bigger and better things. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken, unless anybody has any questions for me about generalities. You will learn much, much more throughout the process. I think our goal is that you all become citizen planners through this process, and that you maybe one day could give a presentation like this to your civic club or your neighborhood. So thank you.
Okay. Any questions on that specifically? Okay, we move down to number 4 on our agenda. This is presentation discussion regarding the scope of the comprehensive plan update process, including presentations on the different elements of the update, proposed I-69 corridor plan, and the housing investment.
Ken, Elena Helton, city planner, and I'm just going to provide an overview of the scope of the comprehensive plan update. So talk about the different elements of the update, the type of work that's going to be conducted as part of this planning process as we update our comprehensive plan. And we'll talk about just the various tasks, but we won't do too much of a deep dive. And we'll, first we'll open it up for questions. And then after that, we're going to have a short discussion about what's in our current plan and some of those major themes in the different chapters that are located in the plan. So the comprehensive plan update is going to include an update of the chapters that are in the current plan. And so you've got an update of your community profile, which is really your snapshot of the city in time. It's inventory of the city's existing conditions. So it'll include an update based on our census data, demographics, housing, where our current infrastructure is, different types of economic development and just private and public investments that we've seen over time to get an idea of where we're at before we figure out where we're going. So that's going to be that initial existing conditions. That'll update just the baseline information for the city as a starting point for this planning process. The next will be in conjunction with that, we'll have a public participation plan. And so it'll provide a schedule of different activities that will be conducted as part of this public engagement. So it'll include meetings, surveys, digital communications, a comprehensive plan visioning processes, opportunities for volunteers to participate in stakeholder interviews. They'll also have different activities that staff can implement, things that the consultant will be directly involved in, and then the strategies for this committee to actually go out into the into the community and help us gather that input. So it'll be a full-fledged public participation plan, and they'll develop that in conjunction with staff in this committee. As far as the different planning elements, again, they're actually going to be including a review and update of the chapters that are in your current plans. That includes environment and environmental resources. So looking at our current environmental resources and how that informs the character of Nacogdoches, and then how we can better capitalize on those assets to just increase the overall quality of life and aesthetics of our community. The next is going to be economic development. So collecting data and doing a market analysis, and then providing a snapshot in time of our current economic development conditions, what kind of resources we have available for different economic development initiatives, and then strategies for economic development in the future related to the different elements of the comp plan. It'll also include land use. So part of that existing conditions report that I talked about is actually an inventory of our existing land use. So what do we have actually built on the ground today? And then the future land use we'll look at in conjunction with those existing, look at developing possibly new categories of future land use, and then working with this committee and the community to develop a plan for where those land uses should be located in the future. When we talk about where should we promote commercial development and housing and multifamily, and where should we not promote development? What areas should we protect from encroachment into commercial areas? And so really laying out the groundwork for where and how and what type of development that we should see in the city over the next 20 years. It'll also include transportation. So looking at our existing transportation network, looking at that future land use plan and where we should plan for upgrades to our transportation network to support that land use plan. Look at opportunities for multimodal connection, look for gaps to see where we have some missing connections, opportunities to connect neighborhoods, opportunities to upgrade existing facilities, and where we can strategize and not only increase our overall traffic, not only our vehicular, but our pedestrian and multimodal transportation as well. It'll also include housing. So it'll include an inventory of our existing housing. It'll break it down by owner versus rent, age, type, density. It'll identify what kind of housing that we're missing in relation to the market. So it'll do a market assessment of local and regional market demands, and then what we're missing, and help us create strategies to fill that gap. And how can we use public resources? How can we incentivize private development to meet the needs of all of Nacogdoches as far as providing diversity in our housing market? It'll also include neighborhoods. So looking at our neighborhoods, doing an inventory of our different neighborhoods, character, type, looking at different ways that we can vitalize some of our neighborhoods, looking at neighborhood connectivity, and looking at what kind of resources that we have to help improve the quality of life, and also help to protect our neighborhoods and protect that character and that charm that really celebrates Nacogdoches history. So it'll look at providing for transitional development. It'll look at providing connectivity. It'll look at providing buffers and how we can accommodate infill and new development while protecting that charm and that single family character of our historical neighborhoods. It'll also look at historic preservation. So there's an entire chapter on historic preservation. So this will include in review and inventory of our existing historical preservation ordinances and regulations in our different districts, and look at different ways that maybe we can update our districts. Maybe it'll be update in regulations. It could be recommendations for actually expanding some of those historic overlay areas, and then different strategies to just improve our overall historic preservation strategies. It also look at intergovernmental cooperation, so looking at opportunities for different entities to cooperate with each other to try to get some better implementation strategies. And so it could be partnerships with the city and the county, or the school district and the county, or looking at different ways that we can partner to utilize our resources to the best of our ability. It'll also include a future I-69 corridor plan. So looking at our future I-69 corridor, providing an inventory of our infrastructure, land uses, and then projecting future infrastructure that's needed for economic development, commercial, industrial, and then looking at different development standards to help create character within that area. So we can make sure that whatever gets developed, it really is in line with the goals and objectives of the community and what we want that area to look like and feel like as an entrance into Nacogdoches. It'll also include a housing needs analysis. So that's part of that housing chapter, that inventory of our existing housing, looking at what we have, what we need, and the strategies to fill those gaps. It'll also include a comprehensive implementation strategy. So looking at the comprehensive plan, I-69 plan, our other plans. So we have a Parks and Recreation plan that was updated a few years ago, looking at all those different plans, the downtown plan, and how to create a overall implementation strategy. So that way we can utilize our resources to the best of our ability and find opportunities to complete multiple projects at once. And so that's just a brief summary of the actual scope and what's going to be completed as part of this comprehensive plan update. For that, I was going to let Ken just talk a little bit more about the different chapters and what's in it and what's not. Ken, do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And hope you all brought your binders. I have slides. But your binder for the one that says just comprehensive plan update on the front cover. So this is the current comprehensive plan done in 2003. And when you read through it, you'll find out that this was actually an update to a 1994 version of the plan. One of your homework assignments between this meeting and our next is going to be to read over this, and really for some specific reasons. But I hope everyone gets a chance to at least become familiar with all the different sections of the plan. The thing you'll find interesting is a lot of the challenges and goals and issues that are addressed in 2003 were apparently the same ones that were addressed in 94. And I think a lot of them are still issues in 2021 or 2022. Maybe there's a gap between our analysis problems and action on them. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. I think that's part of what we're here to do, is figure out what did the previous plans try to address, what was good, what was bad, and what didn't get acted on for one reason or another. If we're going to skip chapter 1, because that's basically just a introduction to what planning does. I'm going to skip to the community profile under chapter 2. So it's kind of interesting because the planning was done based off of projections for what they thought the population of the city was going to be in 2020. And as it turns out, I think the projections were a little off according to the census numbers we have. And I think there's some debate over the accuracy of some of the census numbers because of COVID and maybe undercounting. But our numbers ended up being lower than the projections. And you'll find out under community profile, the first heading is growth slowdown. This was 2000. And on table 2.1 on page 22, you'll see basically census data from every year between every 10 decade between 1900 and 2000. Pretty interesting. The change in population over the years. You'll note, I don't think we need to go back all the way to 1900, but looking from 1970 on, and I think some of you mentioned you moved here around the 60s or 70s. We were doing introductions last week. Interesting that the town almost doubled in that decade of the 60s. Even though there's a lot of people who think, hey, we want to retain our small town charm. The population was actually growing pretty strongly back then. And only recently has it begun to slow down. You'll see in 2000, there was a slight reduction between 1990 and 2000 in Nacogdoches city population. And the city has become smaller and less of a component or a smaller percentage of the overall county. And I don't know how that stacks up with this year's figures. I tried to get some numbers when I was reviewing this weekend, and I'll be honest, I found the census website kind of hard to navigate on the city and county level. But I'm sure we'll have those when we get through the process. Interesting that, you know, one of the issues that we had identified was the growth slowdown. And when you read through here, you'll find out that it was partially at least attributed to more people moving out into the county or development happening outside of the city limits. Some of it in the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the city, which in Texas is 2 miles outside of the city limits, where the city retains some legislative authority, but a lot of it happening further out in the county. The growth in Central Heights and Woden and Martinsville and Douglas. And that was already happening a year ago. So that's a trend that's been here for a while. Given that, the population estimates, they projected the city would be at 33,882, given I think that was the lowest estimate. There are 3 or 4 different methods they used. Do you know where we actually ended up off the top of your head?
It's actually a little less than that. It's like
Yeah.
around 32.
32,000, yeah. And so, you know, not considering how much the population of Texas has grown over the past 20 years, a lot of other, if you look at Tyler, Longview, the growth has not been seen here as it has in those communities. So it's just something interesting to think about. So in my opinion, I think this is a good section to go back and actually read and see what the issues and the planning concerns were back in 2003, because we do future planning based on what we think people are going to need and how many people there are going to be and what the water needs are going to be and the sewer needs are going to be and the electricity needs are going to be. And if we undershot our estimates, but yet still have a lack of maybe some of those utility coverage or the services that we would expect, then something is wrong in the process, right? So interesting to go through this, and it will be actually very interesting as we go through the process to get a newer comparison between this chapter and where we actually ended up when we have all the numbers to show you. So I'm going to move on now to chapter 3. Any questions or comments on the demographics and population numbers? Before I move on? Okay. So chapter 3 is basically a kind of a summary of the entire plan. It is into the weeds as each subsequent chapter, but it does give you an overarching idea of what the vision was and what at least the goals were for each chapter that follows. The vision statement is right there on page 3-2. And this is supposed to be guided the whole planning process. Nacogdoches, the oldest town in Texas, appreciates and protects its historical, natural, and cultural character, promotes a healthy living environment, and enjoys future growth and prosperity. So that was their vision statement when they undertook the planning process. And then as you go through, you'll see on page 3-4, halfway down the page, goals by plan and element. This is where the firm that did the planning, they took each category, which is the subject of a full chapter as you go through. And they broke down into the goals of each, that they arrived at under each category. And you'll note there's quite a few goals. Now, to get to the actual action items and objectives for those goals, you have to go into the chapters. But we're just going to keep this at a very high level today, because when we meet next time, we're going to get more into which of these goals did we strike out on, which did we mean to do and somehow missed, which should we scrap, and we're going to discuss where we think the holes or the shortcomings are overall in the existing plan. So let's look at starting with the environment and natural resources. Take a second to read the bullet points under that. Those are the goals. To read those on your own. As you read those, is there anything that strikes anybody's interest, or that you think is interesting about those goals? Yeah, to be honest, me neither, kind of. I don't think anybody's going to disagree. We like good water, right? We would like to preserve scenic beauty and natural habitat. But, that does come back into the tension that Larissa brought up between development and how do you do that development while keeping these environmental resources sustainable. Are there any goals that you think are missing from that section that should be included? No? Well, I think as we go through, there'll probably be some more. Let's go down to land use. Land use is probably the one I'm most familiar with, as from my time working with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We use the land use plan as a guide for zoning changes. When we're looking at an applicant comes in and says they want to rezone their property, by ordinance, we have to look at the 2003 comprehensive plan to say, how does this fit into what we have projected for that area? And a lot of times the projections are not what I would call up to date. So starting at the top of page 3-5, there are 4 goals listed. Long-term growth in appropriate areas to achieve an efficient, diverse, and balanced pattern of land uses within the city, and urbanizing portions of its extraterritorial jurisdiction. A variety of safe, high-quality residential areas that meet the needs of Nacogdoches residents. Vibrant and viable commercial and industrial areas supported by a quality community, offering many assets and opportunities for economic development. And high-quality development that respects community character and the natural environment, and it doesn't overburden public services and infrastructure. Now, this is where you'll see when it comes to development, there needs to be a lot of coordination between different stakeholders. You know, you've got developers and then you've got the city who's providing the services, providing water, sewer, fire, police. And I don't know where we stand right now as far as, do we have enough, do we have the fire coverage we need? Do we have the police coverage we need? Have we met those goals? I think those are things that we probably need to dig into a little bit more as we go through the process. But does anybody have a specific comment about any of those four goals as far as they relate to land use in the city? How about, do you think we're meeting the needs of Nacogdoches residents with regard to our residential offerings? Do we have enough houses? Do we, Ed?
No.
No? Okay. What are we missing in your opinion?
Well, the one thing that's being worked on right now is trying to infill within the city limits, existing lots that can be created. There's been quite a bit of work on that lately, and I think we've got a fair number of lots that will be hitting this summer, which will be good. I mean, people keep asking me all the time, how many new units can we handle? No, a big guess would be 40 to 50 new units.
Okay.
That's doable next year. That doesn't get us ahead, but it kind of curbs the flow a little bit.
Where are people going that can't find houses in Nacogdoches?
Well, that's the other problem. We don't have rental either. And so it's very difficult for new residents that are coming to town and secure housing without some frustration. And that was hard this year, without a doubt. So a lot of people have opted to buy because they couldn't find rental. But at the same time, there's not much out there for that either. So consequently, you have people that may not have made a move because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things, when you get into the planning here, it talks about, I think it's later on in actually in the housing and neighborhoods, so we'll probably get into that more there, but yes, I'll hold that for now. But I've heard some anecdotes about people living in Lufkin because they couldn't find a house here. Is that really happening in your opinion?
Yes, I mean, the Lufkin market is not as vibrant as ours, so there's more availability over there. Of course, they lost quite a few industries in the last few years, so because of that move out, that helped a little bit too. I mean, predominantly people don't want to live in Lufkin and work here, but they have to. I don't know. I mean, you just take care of them one at a time the best you can, but I don't think there's a mass exodus to Lufkin because they can't find houses here. I think it happens, but not to huge degree.
Okay.
It's more in the community, in the county, and then several people that
Right.
much rather not have to live out in the county, but don't have a choice.
Interesting.
Are we talking about single-family homes?
Single family housing, yeah, we haven't had any new multifamily housing in quite a while. So, that's got to be addressed at some point. It seems that we're okay on student housing, those type complexes, but single family and probably to some point senior adults, we do have a shortage. If you look at occupancy rates for existing complexes, they're extremely high.
Yeah. And are rents up now too?
Rents are finally, that's been a misnomer for this year. Rents are finally going up somewhat. That's been a problem with apartment complexes because our rents are not what construction costs will support. The other problem too is that if you have a single family residence house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you might get $1,300 to $1,500 a month for it. Now that's a $200,000 house. So economics don't work for rental. So I tell people all the time, it's much more valuable as an owner occupied single family house than as a rental unit because our rents have not caught up.
Speaking from, that's why we have We have a lot of rental properties in Lufkin just because it doesn't make sense for us.
Right.
Investment wise to do them here. The rents just don't match financially. We'd much rather be here in Mac. But our market is just not really supported as much.
You have the same comment from people that are renting that our rents are really high. What do you do?
And that was actually identified as a problem 20 years ago. And I think 10 years before that. So kind of interesting. Even though the growth population wise, if the census numbers are accurate, has not kept up with predictions. Apparently neither has our housing stock. So it's kind of interesting. Going down to transportation. There are 5 goals listed there. The one that I thought was interesting was progress toward being recognized as a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly community, and a community that shows particular concern for accessibility for all persons. We have built some sidewalks, but I don't think we've probably made as much progress there as the goals set forth. But surprisingly, we have done some things. The public transit, the Brazos Valley transit system is now in place here. I don't know if that's a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing, which is what they had previously. And coordination of land use and transportation planning, and that's a big deal because I think North Street is one of the big, examples that you see in the transportation chapter, and they discuss taking sections of North Street restricting left turns, for example. And basically putting a median in and having just certain access points for turns. Now, I don't think you do that the whole length of the North Street from one loop to the south loop. But that was one of the thoughts or suggestions in the 2003 plan. For probably a variety of reasons, not TxDOT, it has to be involved in that process. It hasn't been done. But there were some other things like the widening of Star Avenue, the widening of East Austin Street. Those are done. We actually accomplished some of those things. Those were identified back in 2003 as issues that need to be done for traffic alleviation. And the thing about a lot of the goals in this current plan is I wouldn't call them vague, but they're not specific necessarily. I think you read through the transportation and maybe a more specific goal would be to increase pedestrian safety and drivability on North Street without reducing access to businesses that are already there. Maybe that would have been a better type goal to have than just, hey, let's make sure our transportation meets our land use. Too vague, I think, would be actionable in some ways. But looking at those goals, and I think transportation is probably one that we all have a little bit more. I'll drive. We all walk around, and we all have to park somewhere sometimes. So I think we all have more opinions about our transportation needs in the town. Any goals there that you think are missing or that need to be articulated better?
If I could pop something over that, if you guys look up to this slide or go to page 18.
Yeah.
You can tell me what the current proposed footprint of I-69 will be going through Nacogdoches. If somebody can.
I can't understand your question.
Ed, can you answer that for me?
Vaguely.
It is not this. So I will, trick question there. So I think one of the incredibly important things for this group to consider is the impact of I-69 on the community, the potential impact of I-69 on the community. Elena, when she was going through the scope, she mentioned that transportation, that corridor study for I-69. Just to give you an overview, the plan, when it was adopted in 2003, the I-69 plan showed I-69 swinging out by the airport west of town. It would go essentially through green fields. Well, we know that those aren't green fields, those are somebody's pastures and, and things like that. Now the plan is to lay 59 closest to the city of Nacogdoches on the west loop. Now, north of Nacogdoches and south of Nacogdoches, that changes a little bit. You know, we don't know what their plans are for Garrison and example, Timpson and places like that. But in the city of Nacogdoches, it will lay on the west loop footprint as closely as possible. You can imagine from a planning standpoint, how it's a highway several miles outside of town versus a highway on in our existing town. So just keep that in mind. Maybe the next time you have to go somewhere and take the west loop, look at what's around there now, picture what could be there in the future, picture other interstates and other towns similar to ours, Lufkin, for example, picture how their loop is developed, think about just other places where you've driven through and the impact the interstate has. Think of good examples and bad examples. Sorry to interrupt, Ken.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Yeah, and that is one of the major issues that we're going to run into is how will a full-fledged interstate affect traffic flow inside the city? How will people get off that interstate into where the businesses are? Or will the businesses leave where they are in the city to go out to where the traffic is? And if that happens, how do we replace those businesses? That goes into land use, and it also goes into transportation patterns. We have to have some sort of plan to get traffic from that interstate into downtown, into SFA, into the areas where we want people to be able to get to without disrupting the town in a bad way. And so I think that is a huge issue, which was only kind of hinted at in the 2003 plan. Though they knew that there was an interstate coming, but it seemed like it was a long way off. And it might still seem like it's a long way off, but I think it's a lot closer now. But when you get into the transportation plan on page 6-14, and you'll notice this kind of going forward where it gets into these more specific issues like housing and utilities and community facilities. There will be a table, and this table is 6.1 there. Basically breaks down, here's things that we thought we wanted to do in the 94 plan. Here's what we have or haven't done in 2003. Very interesting to read that and to go through while you're reviewing this and say, oh, we wanted to do that, or, oh, we actually, some of these things we've actually done. For example, I noticed number 12 on page 6-15. They wanted to upgrade to a traffic signal at the intersection of East Austin and Briquet. Some point between 94 and 2003, they decided it wasn't necessary. Well, that has since been now upgraded. I think it became necessary because the road got widened, but it's just interesting to see that, you know, these things have been issues for, you know, almost 30 years now. And some of them have just been taken care The, um, so one of the things that, we're gonna do as we get started in this process is we're gonna ask this group to get into each of these separate sections, look at the goals and say, well, here's goals we need to keep, and here's goals we don't need, or that were unnecessary, or maybe we've met. And then here's some goals that we didn't address or articulate the first time that should be listed in our plan, that we should be asking whoever is doing the plan to address in their planning process. I think that's important because part of this process is going to be community engagement. And if we can say, hey, these are the things that we think the community needs to discuss in their meetings, then they'll actually get discussed and they won't be hopefully missed in the planning process. Any comments on transportation as a part of the plan?
Well, how do you balance, every time a road has been widened, it just means more traffic. That's been my experience. And then you want more sidewalks and more walking and bicycle riding. So how do you balance that out? Because if you keep widening roads, I know there's a culture in Texas or East Texas anyway, that when you walk or ride a bicycle, or I had a scooter at one time, you feel dangerous. You feel in danger on anything but a slow, small street. So how do we do that?
That's a good question.
Because if we keep widening these streets, it just gets less and less able to.
It's a good question because, and I was reading the 1974 downtown plan the other day for some reason. And it's interesting. You look at it and they had this idea of widening main streets, sidewalks, and kind of reducing the traffic area and the parking, having more pedestrian and actually closing off some of the streets like Church Street, wanted to make it pedestrian only. And you think about how that would change the character of downtown. And then there also talk about having bike lanes and more pedestrian friendly lanes from the residential area surrounding SFA to campus. Because I do see that a lot if I'm driving around, I guess the Pecan Orchard area over there between like Regay and Pecan Street and your Regay Elementary. You see a lot of students walking on the street because there's no sidewalks. Or riding their bikes and there's no bike lanes, going back to their house or apartment. And so it's been an issue for a long time, but I don't think we've ever really addressed it, to be honest. And maybe that's because it hasn't been a specific enough goal. It's just been kind of like, hey, we should think about having more bike access. But at the same time, we've taken actions like widening. And I think you do have to have certain, if you're going to narrow other streets and make them more pedestrian friendly, maybe you do have to have streets like East Austin that are more for the cars. But then, you can funnel the traffic down those streets so you can make other streets less car heavy, I guess, in their traffic flow. But that's a good question. And I think it's something we need to talk about because it's something I think it's come up at a lot of economic development meetings and sidewalks have been a big issue. We've had some put in along North Street, and I think that was all a TxDOT project. And we've done some updated sidewalks, I think, on the city side. But yeah, it remains an issue. And in the downtown plan, they actually talk about how some of the curbs are not accessible, and you don't really realize it if you're a normal, if you're just walking around. But if you were in a wheelchair, some of those curbs are inaccessible. So it's kind of interesting, and they were inaccessible in the 70s. So, and they're still inaccessible. So yeah, there's some things there that that need to be addressed, I think.
But will the flow in 69, which is gonna make life much easier for people, getting on and off, will that slow some of the traffic? Will that take some of the traffic away?
Good question.
That's a Larissa question.
It could, probably not, because most of the traffic driving down North Street is local traffic anyway.
Okay.
They're not traveling through unless they needed to stop for gas or something like that. I think it has the potential to increase traffic in town because more people will be traveling on 69, and so more people will be coming in to stop for gas or something to eat. I think more importantly, kind of bringing us back to that 30,000 foot level is your question brings to my mind the thought that everything in this plan interacts with each other. And so if this group came together and said, we want to be a more pedestrian friendly town, it's not just about building sidewalks and how our streets are built, it's about how our businesses are located and how our houses are located and how, can you even walk from your house to a business distance wise? So land use and economics and all of those things come into play. It's not just hardscape, sometimes it's policy as well.
Moving on to chapter 7, and I'll go back to the vision goal. Utility infrastructure. I think this is something where when we just get into more discussions of this, we have to bring in the experts to kind of help us understand where we lack. And I think there's, as far as utility infrastructure in the comprehensive plan, I think it's going to be a little bit more of like a 30,000 foot. There's separate utility master plans that are being done by engineers. So, but still, we should have goals about what we want those plans to achieve. One of the big issues when you read through this was, well, how is population going to grow? How is that going to affect our water usage, our sewer needs in the town? How much water is going to be used on a daily basis? Can we treat and can we provide enough fresh water? Also, if we provide water to other, like Central Heights is connected to the Nacogdoches water system. Do we have the capacity, if they continue to grow, meet their needs? A lot of utility issues, even though the city is mainly concerned with potable water provision and getting rid of wastewater. There's also stormwater collection, which becomes an issue every time that we have a large rainfall, which seems like it happens all the time. And so there's a lot of, and I know some people have drainage issues that affect their businesses because it prevents people from getting in when the weather gets rainy. So some interesting things there. Any comments or on utility infrastructure as a part of the plan? Okay.
One thing that you guys may know, just a little interesting bit, if you look on page 2, this speaks very much to the importance of public participation. In the middle of page 2, enhancing and adding to existing storm drainage. There's a comment there that says over 70% of the comments received during the community forum address concerns over drainage issues. I would venture to guess that 70% of you in this room don't think drainage is the most important thing to talk about. But at the time when we had that community meeting, we may have just had a big storm. And when this plan was developed, there was one large community input meeting, and there were some smaller meetings, but the community input was certainly not as robust as we were hoping to do in the future plan. So that's just a snapshot of what can happen if we don't do a good job of community input. This plan focuses a lot on drainage. because of those comments from the citizens, and it maybe wasn't really truly the most important thing, it was just an incorrect snapshot.
Or it could have been a problem
And maybe we fixed it.
now you'll see the vac trucks out there vacuuming out
Right.
the leaves and pine straw out of drains. And I think we probably built new drains. We could ask the engineers about that. But
To put a little perspective, the last week I've gotten 3 separate calls about drainage.
Gotcha.
So, it may be that individually, we see huge drainage issues. I mean, serious drainage problems, property damage and everything. Steve, I know you've talked about drainage issues. We do have drainage challenges, right, in the city.
We always have.
And we also, right. So it may be on an individual level and comes out in a group, hey, yeah, I didn't think that, but once people start talking, they see a comment.
Right, but to have 70% of the comments at a
That's-
forum, it's
Isn't it-
odd.
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah.
it must have been a flood or something.
Right, maybe a hurricane.
With like internet and stuff like that, it should be included in any of these categories, like in the utility or.
Yeah, let's see, where did I read that? I was reading that.
It's definitely a bigger issue now.
I don't think I had it on.
Right.
I read it when I was reading our census data. It said that
That's
like 82% of the people in the city have a computer that can connect to the internet, and 70-some%, I think it was close to 75, have broadband access, which surprised me.
Well,
Yeah.
that's so much, even with the definition of it.
Oh, okay.
Changed since 2000.
Yeah.
70% pay for broadband access.
Let's not get that.
It's,
You're talking about suddenly?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but yeah, that is not a utility that the city is in the business of providing.
Right.
But it is something that needs to be done in coordination if, for example, if we're talking about, and we're gonna get to housing in neighborhoods next, if we want to develop new housing, you gotta be able to get your utilities there. That includes water, sewer, electricity, and internet is crucial in anything.
And if we want to bring anybody from out of town to move here, that could theoretically be working online, we have to be able to get online well to work.
But yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why they built the NAC space and the because they had trouble getting local. You're our IT expert, Jacob, aren't you? You're our IT. I would say you're our IT guy.
Oh, not necessarily. People think I am.
Okay.
Well, some cities actually do own the lines
Yeah,
and that's part of what they have decided to invest in, is the lines that they then rent to providers. So it's an income source and a stabilizing source for their communities.
Well, it just hit me during COVID when, I'm glad that NISD came up with a problem-solving solution, but one of the solutions was for kids to come sit in my parking lot at my office to get on my Wi-Fi to do their homework.
yeah.
And that just did not seem conducive to learning. And was concerning that there was that many kids who needed it, that they would be asking businesses to do that.
Yeah.
it will probably show up in many places in the plan. I don't want to say what it will say or where it's ever written, obviously, but that's another sticking point in this plan is when it was written in 2003, this didn't exist. Like you said, you didn't even know if you were online in 2003 at your house. So there's some infrastructure things that it might show up in utility. And then like you said, it may also show up in neighborhoods. It may show up in smaller places, but it will be probably throughout the plan.
Yeah, but I think we can all agree that that is something that you have to be competitive for business or education or just people want to have access to good internet and more and more is moving. So I think that is something important. We already kind of got into the housing and neighborhoods, but you'll see some of the goals there. I'm on page 3-6 now. The when you get into the plan, they talked about affordable housing being an issue. And remains an issue. Entry-level houses. We just don't have enough of them. And they focused on the fact that we needed quality affordable housing, which is hard to do. But that is one of our, I think, ongoing issues. Building new neighborhoods that are more, you look at some of the neighborhoods that were built in the past 50 years, like off Appleby Sand, that are kind of just straight roads, versus ones that are more of a community that the roads connect and it's not just a mile-long strip of asphalt. Those are the type of issues that they're discussing. And also, trying to promote and protect and preserve our existing neighborhoods and bring them together in a way where they are able to kind of celebrate their uniqueness. Some of our historic areas or any areas that are off of like the Pine Crest Division, Colonial Hills, something like that, just making sure that there's some way for the people that live there to feel invested in their community. One of the things, and this was mentioned, I think, last week, they also have a goal or discuss manufactured housing as a viable and affordable option, with a lot of qualifications on where it would be put and how it would look. But that's something that I think was not adopted. And, I think if you look at this plan again, these are all really great things. We want to grow sensibly without overstraining our services and we want to make sure that the tax revenue that gets added from a house is adequate to hire enough firefighters and police officers and have the city services there for the new residents. So those are all things that are important concerns to address. But again, these are very high level issues. I think this is a pretty important one. Any comments specifically on housing and neighborhoods? Any of the goals that are listed there or anything that you think should be listed there?
I just had a question about,
Sure, Paul.
somewhere in this report, I read where the average size house and occupancy of the housing was like 2.4. So, the housing that's being built, does it meet that or is it, what your house is? Seem like duplexes or something.
Yeah, I saw that too. It sounded like, I don't know if it's skewed by back then with college students or reporting they're a single person in the household, maybe have roommates or, I was wondering how where those numbers came from, or if when you look at the demographics, the majority of people were under age 50, so it's not older retirees that are living by themselves, empty nesters. So I wondered how those numbers worked out myself. I don't know if that is still true.
Yeah, I think around the college, it was even less than 2.
Yeah.
Or 2.
Is that data that'll come out of the census?
So the new census data will provide an update on that average person per household. And we, over the last 20 years, we have seen trends and really a change in what we consider like a nuclear family, like the traditional definition of a family, Families look different than they did 20 years ago. People's housing arrangements are a little bit different than they were a few years ago. Some of that's based on cultural changes. Some of it's based on economic changes. Some of it's based on, you have empty nesters and then the kids are coming back home. And so that's a trend that you didn't really see as much 20 years ago. And so we do expect to see an increase in that average person per household number. Some of it's reporting. People don't always report how many people they have in their house. But I think some of it's also kind of just trends and shifts that we've seen since this census data.
And remember that housing analysis, I think, is a big part of this because housing has come up several times in this. And what it can do is look at those demographics and break it down and not just go, okay, it's 2.4 people per house. What do we truly need? Just like you're saying, if we're building 4-bedroom houses and we've got an average of 2.4 people, what are the people per house? Let's take the college students out of that equation and see how many people per household are in non-college households. Do we need to be building 5-bedroom houses? Do we need to, and it'll dive more deeply.
It's currently 2.33.
It is.
But you can go deeper into tracts, census tracts to find out where any place, there's a huge Hispanic undercount in the census, huge Hispanic, Latino undercount across the board.
Well, and you tend to see an undercount with small children too, because people don't think of the children as occupants. And so you see an undercount as small children, you see an undercount just with kind of cultural issues, undercount with students. So not only what is that average person per household, but what's that makeup? Like how many of them have kids? How many of them have one head of household? How many of them, are single parents? How many of them have a, alternative living arrangement? So not only the number, but what does that dynamic look like?
Maybe one of the issues then for us is how to use the census data, even though it may have flaws. Like how do we use it in a way that's not misleading us?
That's also assuming it never had flaws before.
True.
Exactly.
I'm sure it always does flaws. It's never going to be perfect, but if it's severely undercounting numbers, that is an issue. I don't know if there's any way to even estimate what it's undercounting.
Well, and there's other resources that are used in conjunction with that. It's not solely just the census data. There's housing market trends and other data that's collected by other entities that's in conjunction with that to paint a better picture of what that actually looks like. Because sometimes what people are actually reporting is a little different from what people are actually building, and we have to take that into consideration, and it's usually an average of some sort. But they haven't released fully all of the data, and so we'll get a better picture in a few months and figure out what it really looks like as far as where we think we were supposed to be and what the numbers are showing.
It doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you can explain how we've only added a few hundred residents according to the census, but we don't have any housing and we don't have any
Yes.
rentals and we don't have any,
Great question. What we're seeing nationally, especially in college towns, is, Census Day was April 1st. And by the time that people were actually getting forms in the mail, students were already at home. They had already left. And so when there's no one at the door, Census uses administrative records. So they look at leases, they look at utility bills. If you've got 5 kids living in a house, usually the utility bill's under one name. The lease is under one name. And so when you do that 50 times, you can kind of see how that could exacerbate an issue. And so I think with COVID, it's really created kind of some exponential effects. And so and I think, again, specifically because you see that undercount more so in these metro college towns than you do in other areas. So there's a case to be made that you look at like our development patterns and then you look at the numbers, kind of taking that particular demographic with a grain of salt. So those are all things that we'll have discussions about whenever we go through this process and looking at the data and then trying to interpret that and what we know our community has been doing and what we know or where we know that we've been growing versus a report that the federal government's. So I think a lot of it is the data that's collected, but a lot of it is common sense. Like we know that there's been new projects built. We know SFA has increased their numbers. We know that we've seen more housing than we did 20 years ago. And so just, and that's why it's so important to get that community input to make sure that it is an accurate picture of our community.
You know, just my overall feeling about it is I see these little tiny starter houses that are built up and down Martinsville and over in different sections of town, but I don't see them creating neighborhoods. I just see them as little houses that people live in for a while till they can move on. But to me, we're not creating neighborhoods. We're just diluting neighborhoods right now, it seems to be. And then the other houses that I see built are way up on the $250,000 to $450,000 spectrum. But there's no middle in all of that. Do you see the same thing, or?
Seems like it to me, and that's what I hear from anybody in the real estate business.
It is, just kind of give you an idea of why that happens. The ones we've been working on lately are going to be homes that are 12 to 1,300 square feet that are in subdivision. And so I think there's been a lot of backfill because new subdivisions haven't started and nothing else has been done. So they'll pick a lot here and pick a lot there just to get a house built on it. Contractors are having a problem because they're spending X number of dollars on a lot, which doesn't justify a 12 or 1,300 square foot house. So they'll build a $400,000 house because then it justifies the land and they can make more money off of it. So the incentive to go back and get them to build normal priced houses for people that need them is kind of what the push has been for. And then I think that's happening. I really do. I've seen a lot of that move that direction. But the odd thing to me, and we're talking in an economic development meeting the other day, 12 to 1,300 square foot new construction houses over $200,000. You know, they changed a lot. So we're starting to see that. And I was just on the phone with a contractor, and prices are still working their way up as far as materials and that sort of thing. And they're even having a hard time figuring out what to charge because if they, you know, put one committed and it's 8 months to build it, you know, it's an issue. But you are correct that there's been a lot of infilling because there haven't been new subdivisions, but the city's been pretty proactive in finding those tracts of land that can be subdivided without a lot of additional cost because the infrastructure kills us. We had one the other day that I thought was in a perfect area for houses, and they were going to build houses that we need. And a good developer, good construction, good project, sewer line was 1.5 miles away. You know, what do? You know, you get mad at somebody in the 1990s that didn't do it right and should have added the trunk line in there. Well, they didn't know. I mean, that's the thing. And to me, and here I'm preaching again, but that's the thing that this comprehensive plan is so important for because, you know, if you think residential is going to be here, or let's get a trunk line in there that'll handle 300 homes. Then when we get ready to do that, it's not a deal killer. And so if in the way we've done it in the past, it's just the way we've done it is whatever the need is at that time, we do it. But we don't think past that need. This particular area, there's a new subdivision there, and that line perfectly serves that subdivision, but it won't serve anymore. So we've got to give some direction to the city to go back and say, where's our growth area? Where do we want it to be? How do we get the infrastructure in place? I mean, it's got to happen. And the costs are there. I get it. And it's not fun to put in a water and sewer line because you can't see it. But it sure makes a difference when you try and grow a city.
I was just going back to what Brad was saying. I think sometimes many of us in this room, we don't always see the need of the less fortunate in our community. And as we look at planning forward, we are one of the poorest areas in Texas. And so to not think of where decent sewers and that kind of thing for people who don't have money, we need to think about. I was talking to someone from the university in social work, and there are areas where people are living where they're still on dirt roads in our town, in our area. And that's not what we see every day, but certainly we're not going to not have poor people living in our area, and we ought to consider that in our long-range planning.
That's a great point. 'Cause one of the things, I don't recall seeing it in here, I may have missed it. is How do you go into neighborhoods that are having issues and help fix those issues? How do you know, where do you start? For those that may be as simple as adding infrastructure, paving roads, or maybe there's other things that the city can do at a city level, or with grants to address those things. But yeah, we focus a lot on the new building, but not necessarily how do you help the existing established neighborhoods that might need more investment. Yeah,
I think he just cleared his throat.
okay. Everybody's got the allergies right now. Also, to go along with that is what is the goal? What kind of community do we want to have? Do we want to focus on as a community for retirees? Focus on SFA and student housing, and then the result housing for young professors, or that type of demographic? Or do we want to try to add become a destination for people with young kids to move here, or starting their families? And I'm not sure. I think market forces, as Larissa mentioned earlier, have a lot of impact on that, but I'm not sure if we even have an idea of what we want to do on that front right now.
Actually, if we had lots of affordable houses, we would be saying we're in a depression right now. To be honest, I mean, if you have more houses than you can rent or sell, that means things are going downhill.
True.
And when you're like San Francisco or Los Angeles or any of those places, when people are bidding up and spending millions of dollars, because I lived in an area that made mansions, little 50 by 100 lot places, and they built multi-million-dollar houses on them. And it's weird to me, if you really look at it, in the 171 years that we've kept any population count here, we don't grow that much. We have 33,000 people here in 171 years. And it seems to follow World War II. It grew. Vietnam War and the Korean War grew afterward. So it seems to be cyclical, but we never seem to get past 30,000 people. We go to 29 to 33. We're just, are they expecting in this next 20 years for us to go to 60,000 or 160,000?
I think that's a great question, because I think you have to look at this 2020 census, and then they have to do some sort of projection based on what we've done in the last 20 years forward.
If you put 2021 on this comprehensive plan, I would agree with it. It's like, we want good houses, we want a nice neighborhood, everything they said is what we want. What are we gonna write? And I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just asking, what's gonna be different in our goals other than internet?
I think that's what the next 18 months are designed for.
Yeah, I think.
We can't do that today.
Yeah.
Right, I know.
That's exactly the kind of question I'm actually asking everyone in here, is like, where are we? If this is what we are currently operating off of, where is it missing the mark? And because if we don't provide, we're supposed to be a steering committee. If we don't provide a coordinate or a direction for people to go to, then it's probably not going to be a plan that is useful for the city. Because if we think, hey, we need to address this issue, then let the experts go in and figure out, okay, here's what the community is saying about that issue. Here's what the census data says about that neighborhood. You know, whatever the issue is, yeah, I do think we need to figure out what is our goal overall at the end of the process. And to get specific on some of these goals, because, you know, I would say these goals are pretty broad. They do have objectives. They do have action statements, but they don't necessarily, who's responsible for it? You know, who is responsible for implementing it? I don't know.
Be the economic forces bigger than us are responsible for most of it.
Yeah, I think that's what ends up happening if you don't have some sort of coordination at a city or grassroots level that says, hey, this is an important thing we want to do. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. Then you're just left to kind of drift with the tides. I think you're right on that. And, you know, Texas itself is growing quite a bit. I think it's a matter of time if we have an interstate here where we see that same growth creep up the interstate from Houston. And one of my main concerns has always been in this process is how do we prevent the interstate from, like you're saying, Mark, just the forces of the economy from doing planning for us because we didn't do it, you know, because we didn't say, here's what we want along the interstate. Here's how we want people to get in and out of town. And then before we know it, we wake up one day and it's all been decided for us by forces outside of our control, and we're stuck with it. That's one thing I'm scared about. If we don't have a plan that has goals that are things we think we care about. So I agree with you. I think that we need to have a more thoughtful approach to here's what we think we need to address in the plan.
And I think there's more out there too, though, that, I don't know, I'm trying to broaden my understanding of Nacogdoches, which it used to be very narrow. Now it seems to be broadening out a little bit because there was a study that NETCO did years ago from Catalyst Commercial, and they said that our daytime population is 118,000 people. Okay, well, we're all focusing on this 33,000 people on the population side, on the city limit side. That's not everything. So, I don't know about you, but I drive around today, there are more cars on our streets. It's congested. I joke, we even have rush minute now on North Street. So, you know, so you look at that and you think, okay, there are more people here. There's no doubt about that. And then you do traffic studies and one intersection has 20,000 cars, another one has 30,000 cars. Okay, go back to that 32,000 population sign. Do we drive that much every day? I mean, are we hitting every intersection in town, all of us at one time? I mean, Nacogdoches is very different during the day than it is at night. And so, then the student population, it's always been a big guess. How many of the students are counted in that population? Well, you know, maybe half if we're lucky. Okay, so now there's another 6,000 to 7,000 students there that are here with us that aren't counted in any way. Anyway, there's a lot to consider if you look at that and you think, okay, how am I going to deal with retail or companies or, you know, industrial growth or anything like that? And then how am I going to deal with my, you know, what my home looks like at night?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, then you touched on the interstate. I mean, I've made the comment before, and I don't think I'm wrong. I think I-69 is going to be as significant to us economically as SFA was. I think it's going to be that big.
Yeah.
And because when we look at studies that the state sends to us from, you know, these RFPs that they give us, every one of them, the first question they ask, how far are you from the interstate?
That's very important.
So if you say 60 miles, sorry, you're out.
Doesn't even have to be that far. I come from a town in eastern Kentucky that when I was growing up was 25 to 30,000. We were the third largest town in the state. The interstate when they put it in, nobody wanted it too close to town, so they moved it 8 miles. And now we are one of the smaller towns. So it really, you don't have to go 60 miles. You just have to go a few. So if it goes much further than that, you've lost.
Is that Lexington? Is that Lexington, Kentucky?
Huh?
Is that Lexington?
The town I grew up in.
Oh, Ashland, Kentucky.
Okay. Oh, really? Yeah, I haven't even heard of it. Yeah.
On the Valvoline oil.
San Marcos doubled.
Yeah.
Once the freeway went around it. I don't know if we're in that position, but they say an exit off a freeway, make.
You have to be
college
close.
road.
You have to be close to it. Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, their college is huge now, yeah.
It's doubled, so.
Also have proximity to Austin and
Right.
San Antonio, but, yeah.
So one of the things I think we're talking about is these qualitative, it's not like
Mhm.
a linear, it's a qualitative leap.
Mhm.
And I do think there's, people have said this to me, so I'm not just telling you what I think, that there are several issues that make the current time, that there are qualitative leaps being looked at like right now. And one is safety. You know, people are so concerned now in urban safety that there is a move out to rural America. And then if you look at I-69 coming, instead of it being a 3-hour trip, which it used to be to Houston, it's now a 2-hour, and it'll probably be like a 1.5-hour trip to Houston. So we can easily be a Houston suburb. I mean, almost if you think about it. And then the broadband now has made a qualitative leap. So I've met several people in the last month who have moved here and work for big companies, and they work remotely. And so all those make this right now, and it makes our data collection needs a little different too, because we need to be collecting data about towns that look like us and what happened to them. Because the towns who look like us, who are not a suburb, either grow or die. And they have like parks, and they have, so that needs to be protected, parks. And they have the university, or they have some other, key thing there, or history, something to come to. I think, Brad, you mentioned you went to a town that it was beautiful, and so people came to it. It has to be a destination off that. So anyway, there are some other things. The reason I bring that up is because there are other things that we probably will want to kind of collect data on that we may not have collected data on before, or it's different kinds of data. And community is a huge thing. We've redefined community in the past 10 years. And people are looking for communities. They want the Hallmark town. And we're about as close to a Hallmark town as really many places, so.
I think definitely the timing seems to be appropriate right now. If you look at our community, all the projects going on between SFA, NISD, I-69, it definitely feels like this is the right time to have this conversation. I think we have a great window of an opportunity here that we can really take advantage of.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. All right, so the next section in here, and I'm gonna speed up because we're getting close to one, is services, community services. That is probably one of the more interesting discussions we could. Not only what level of service do we need, how many officers we need, and one of the things you'll note in here, you read it, said they didn't have enough police officers. I don't know where we stand on it right now.
We don't have enough. That's what we're saying.
Okay. I wasn't, they were about 7 short of what they said they needed.
Totally right about that.
Okay. The other thing is facilities, have they been upgraded as removed or consolidated in ways that are fiscally responsible. For example, think of it this way. You've got a fire station on the corner of East Austin and North Street. Everybody knows that one next to the Austin Bank up there. Is that the best location for a firehouse, or would that be better off being redeveloped into something? Probably one of the more valuable intersections for development in town. Is that would it be better for that to be something contributing to the tax base, and should we consolidate that fire station with another one, for example, and build something new? A lot of things to think about. What about the downtown fire station? Would it be better to use that for a different purpose? And I know that's probably more of the downtown master plan focus, but interesting questions to think about. Are our services where they need to be, and where they, given where the population has moved, do we have fire stations that are too close to each other, or too far away from houses? Do we have enough firefighters? Do we have enough police officers? So interesting things. And then on the other side, are we meeting, right now we're sitting in the rec center and the library. Are we hitting enough of the services that the people in the community need? Should we be providing more? Should we be providing different services? Those are all things that I think we need feedback from, and as a steering committee, we need to be planners, guidance on where to look. Because I know if I'm looking at it myself, I've got young children. I see certain things as being needs, which other people who are empty nesters or who don't have children or who are college students, they probably see other things as being needs. So it's important that we all understand where the holes are, because I will guarantee you, I would not have realized what issues we had with our park system until I had kids that wanted to go to parks on a regular basis. And I'll be honest, that they have drastically improved the parks over the last 3 or 4 years. Just done a really good job on that. Part of that was the parks master plan. I remember going, man, this park, I think it was down at Pecan Park. It had like a part of a sewer that was like a big concrete sewer pipe. Broken toys basically. And, they've totally redone it, and it's great now. And so something I wouldn't have recognized had I not been down there with my children going, I can't believe these are the toys down here. But what are the real needs? What are the things we need to look at? That's something, we're not all going to know exactly, what we need to have an effective police force, but we're going to know what we see maybe shortcomings in the coverage and the services provided by the police force, or firefighters, or the ambulance service, or anything like that. So that really, the other sections in here, historic preservation, that is something I do want to discuss. I think it's important to decide what we want to do for historic preservation. I think if we had discussed that 8 years ago, North Street would look different than it does right now, probably. So we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We want to know, I think we've done a good job in the historic overlay, but maybe that should expand. Maybe we should take some other areas of town and create new historic overlays. maybe we just need to make it easier for people to find historic sites or, and I don't know, I think, seems like we do a pretty good job of that, but there are a lot of potential issues there. And it's one of the big tourism draws for the town is historic preservation. Chapter 12 is actually about annexation. Thanks to legislature, probably not as important as it once was. The ability to annex communities that are adjacent to a city have been greatly restricted. Because legislature, so that actually now probably becomes more of a weakness or an issue than it does, a potential strength of, hey, we need to increase our footprint because we're providing all these services to this area of town. Well, let's make them part of the city. Well, we don't necessarily have the ability to do that like we used to. So that might be something interesting as part of the new plan, but the annexation that's in the section that's in the old plan, you can pretty much ignore.
Does everybody understand that part real fast? Annexation? Yes, no? Brad, you're giving me a question on this. So when that plan was written, cities across Texas had a very different set of rules that allowed annexation to occur. Cities today essentially cannot annex. They can annex, but it is with voter approval. And you can venture to guess that that is darn near impossible. It essentially means that cities can only annex if it's a voluntary annexation, or you've had a really, really good campaign of folks. So if you see Central Heights growing and you say, well, we want our plan to show that the city of Nacogdoches should go annex all of Central Heights. Probably not going to happen unless there's changes on the state level.
How come we can pay for their water?
It's not a question I'm prepared to answer.
If not now, when?
I will defer that to Steve and we'll cover that.
Yeah. That is a great question, though. If
That's a form of annexation.
yeah, I don't know the history of the water turnover up there. Yeah, it is a good question because if at some point you're providing water to other communities and it's taxing your own system, what do? You probably charge more for it, but it is one of those things that makes you wonder long-term, what's the plan to handle that? I agree. And that hope we have sewer, the utility section of how we're going to handle those types of issues. Because we have interconnects with other outlying water supply operations, rural water supplies, provide emergency water as well. And you got to make sure you can actually meet those needs in a hurricane or freeze event like we had. I know for a fact in Woden, for example, they have an interconnect on the south side of the city, and they tried to utilize this. They lost a couple of their pumps due to the frozen gas lines actually during the freeze. And when they opened the valve, they had more pressure than the city did. So the water actually started going the other direction. That I think probably uncovered a lot of issues, probably one of the worst stress tests the system will ever get. Probably, hopefully, unlikely to be repeated, but definitely, I think, makes it clear that if you're going to be providing services to outside entities, that you got to have the capacity to do it. So, so that is a kind of a overview of what the different subjects are in the existing plan. What your homework is over the next month, read through the plan. And I'd like everybody to bring 3 goals for each section. So for building, housing, each section of the current plan, 3 goals that you think are important. And then and they can be goals that are already listed. If you think, yeah, this is something that was listed in 2003, but it's still one of my top 3 for this section, that's fine. And then also want you to look at the things that were identified as goals in 2003 and say, these things should not be a goal. Or maybe they could be a goal, but they should need to be far down on our priority list. And when we get back together in January, we will have time to dig into those, discuss as a group where we think we've missed the mark in 2003 plan, where we need to go in the new plan, and what our priorities are going to be. Any questions for me on that? Okay. And that segues nicely into number 6. We're going to discuss our upcoming meetings.
So at the last meeting, we talked about what days and times that we could regularly meet that wouldn't interfere with other committee meetings, other obligations. And so the committee decided to have a regular meeting the second Thursday of every month at 3:30. And so based on that, our next meeting would be January the 13th at 3:30 p.m. It would be in this same meeting. And then following that, the next meeting in February would be February 10th. And if we can reach out and let everyone know, but those are kind of the tentative meeting dates so far. And like Ken said, whenever we come back in January, we'd like you to go ahead and have reviewed those different goals and identify those ones that you think should be taken forward in the new plan, and those that maybe aren't relative anymore or that maybe tweaked. And we'll actually put together a survey form so you can actually choose which ones that you think should be carried forward and maybe which ones that should be eliminated or maybe modified. And so we'll have that for you in January. And in the meantime, unless anyone has any questions about those meetings or your homework, this will be recorded, we'll upload it, and we'll provide some additional notices, and I'll be reaching out as we get closer to the meeting to give you some information on the survey and just remind you about the meeting in January.
And as you're reading, if you just have any general thoughts or comments or anything that just strikes you as unusual or interesting, make a note of those as well. It'll help with our discussion. If you found something in the plan that surprised you, the existing plan. For a lot of us, it's gonna be the first time we've really taken a close look at it and start from the beginning, see where we're starting. So I appreciate your time, and we'll try to be more of a collaborative discussion process. So, and we may break out into some groups next time to really dig into the different sections, to increase our ability to get everyone to talk when there's this many people.
Sorry, that reminds me, I meant to mention, so as you're reading through these, if you identify a chapter or a topic that you're really passionate about, let us know. And so when we're talking about forming those subcommittees, we're identifying those individuals to serve on those and become kind of our committee experts in those particular fields and gather more information and then come back and share them with the group.
All right, and we have box lunches back there. If anybody didn't get one, who wants to grab one, please feel free. And thank you all for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.